Imagine trying to build a machine to communicate with a god.
Right.
But instead of, circuits or wires or a soldering iron, the instruction manual demands a candle, a Bible, and incense angled perfectly to 20 degrees north by northeast.
Which is incredibly specific.
Oh, it really is. And if you are off by a single degree, the connection just fails.
Yeah.
Welcome to today's deep dive. Today we're looking into a text where the supernatural is not treated as some spooky, unquantifiable mystery. It is treated as an aggressively precise science.
It completely reframes what we think of when we hear the phrase psychic channeling.
Totally.
You expect cryptic whispers in a dimly lit room, maybe some emotional theatrics.
Right, the classic crystal ball setup.
Exactly. But instead, what we find in today's source material reads more like the launch sequence of an Apollo mission.
Yeah.
It's the absolute definition of spiritual engineering. It details mechanics, angles, and frequencies.
It is a genuinely fascinating piece of text. We're jumping into a verbatim transcript from January 21st, 1981, which is known as Session 3 of the Law of One.
Yeah, this is a famous one.
So for you listening, let me just give you the quick cast of characters involved in this source. We have Don Elkins, who is the questioner.
Right.
We have Carla Rueckert, who is serving as the instrument or the channeler. And then we have the entity speaking through her, which refers to itself as Ra.
Mm-hmm.
And Ra introduces itself as get this, a social memory complex of the sixth density.
Yeah, that's quite a title.
I have to hit pause right there.
Yep.
Sixth density. I mean, are we talking about dimensions like in interstellar travel, or is this something else entirely?
Well, it is a fundamentally different framework from our standard idea of spatial dimensions.
Okay.
In Ra's terminology, the universe is divided into an octave of densities, which basically represent levels of consciousness or spiritual evolution.
So it's not a place, it's a state of being.
Exactly. So first density is basic elements: earth, wind, water, fire. Second density brings in organic life like, plants and animals.
Right, the flora and fauna.
Yeah. Then third density is where humanity currently resides. It's the density of self-awareness and essentially making a choice between serving self or serving others.
Okay, that tracks. What about the rest?
Well, fourth is the density of love, fifth is the density of light, and sixth, which is where Ra claims to be, is the blending of love and light into a unified understanding.
Wow.
They are essentially a collective hive mind of an ancient civilization that has evolved millions of years past physical bodies.
A collective hive mind that has evolved past physical bodies. That is a massive concept to digest.
It really is.
And before we go any further, I just want to clarify our mission for this deep dive. Our goal here today is not to debate the supernatural validity of this channeling session.
Right. We're not mythbusters here.
Exactly. We aren't here to prove or disprove whether a sixth density entity was actually in that room in 1981. Instead, we are here to explore the incredibly intricate internal logic, the profound philosophy, and the wildly detailed alternate history presented entirely within this text.
Yeah, because the worldview is just staggering.
It is, because whether you view this as literal truth or as, a brilliant piece of improvisational philosophy, the ideas inside are genuinely mind-bending.
Okay, let's unpack this.
The mechanics of how this communication even happens is really the perfect entry point.
Oh, for sure.
Because before any cosmic secrets are revealed, the text dedicates a surprising amount of time to the literal physical setup of the room. It treats Carla's body and mind like an incredibly fragile, hypersensitive receiver that has to be tuned.
I kept thinking of it like calibrating a cosmic satellite dish.
That's a great way to put it.
You don't just sit in a circle and hold hands to get the signal. I mean, Don Elkins literally starts the session by asking if he correctly performed the ritual, and Rob immediately starts giving him spatial corrections. Right, the 20 degrees north by northeast incense thing.
Yeah, exactly. But the text doesn't just list these items as mystical props. It actually provides a mechanical explanation for their functions.
It does. So the incense is described as an energizer for Carla's physical body, symbolizing her humanity.
Okay.
But the visual alignment is where the text gets incredibly specific. The wafted smoke of that incense has to be perceived by Carla's resting eyes at the exact same relative angle as an open Bible.
Even with her eyes closed.
Even with her eyes closed, yeah. And that Bible is then counterbalanced by a lighted candle. Ra claims the Bible and the candle represent two halves of a universal equation: love light and light love.
I noticed that phrasing, and it sounds almost cyclical. What is the actual difference between love light and light love in this framework? It feels like there must be a mechanical distinction they're trying to make.
There is a very specific distinction, yeah. In this philosophy, Love light is the active, creative, energetic push of the universe. It's the intention.
Okay, so it's the engine.
Exactly. Light love, on the other hand, is the receptive, manifesting aspect. It's the wisdom and the physical form that the energy takes.
Oh, I see.
By placing the Bible and the candle in her direct line of sight, the physical representation of this polarity anchors her. The text states this setup gives her distortion complex the sight of paradise and peace.
Wait, I need to isolate that term right there, distortion complex.
It's a big one.
Rao uses the word distortion constantly, and, in normal English, a distortion sounds like a mistake, like a warped mirror or something. But here, it seems to imply something else entirely. How does this visual anchor actually balance her?
Right, so in Ra's physics, the entire universe is a single, unified, undivided consciousness. That is the law of one.
Right.
Therefore, any individuality, any physical body, any thought, or any emotion is technically a distortion of that pure, singular unity.
So being human is a distortion.
Yeah, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a deviation from the absolute source, much like a prism distorts pure white light into a rainbow.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Carla's human mind and body are a distortion complex. The specific visual and aromatic setup energizes her from the lower physical levels up to the higher spiritual levels. It keeps her energetic rainbow perfectly aligned so her physical body doesn't rapidly deteriorate or grow fatigue while channeling this massive energy.
There's also a strict operational security aspect to this tuning process, which I found fascinating.
Oh yeah, the warning.
Yeah. Ra explicitly warns Dawn that anyone allowed in the room must desire to serve others above all else. If anyone is in that room for selfish reasons, their personal mind, body, and spirit distortions will physically disrupt the blending process.
It suggests that intention has a literal, measurable mass and frequency.
Right. It's not just a vibe.
Exactly. A selfish thought isn't just a moral failing in this framework. It acts as physical static on the radio dial. The discordant frequency of a selfish observer would physically crash the connection between Carla and Ra.
Wow. So once this incredibly fragile human receiver is perfectly tuned and the session begins, the conversation immediately zooms out.
It really does.
They move from calibrating a single human mind in a living room to discussing the calibration of the entire planet. The focus shifts to the Great Pyramid of Giza,
which is such a classic UFO or channeling topic.
Honestly, it's the most human place to start. You get a clean line to an ancient cosmic intelligence, and your first question is about the pyramids.
Don actually apologizes for asking it.
He does.
He admits it might be a trivial entry point, but he knows it will be an easy hook for people reading the material later. Burr agrees that it is entirely unimportant data regarding spiritual evolution, but answers anyway because of the responsibility to honor Don's free will in asking.
Right.
What's fascinating here is how Ra completely demystifies the structure. We project so much mysticism onto the Great Pyramid, yet Ra frames it with the language of a civil engineer.
Yeah, Ra reveals there were originally 2 capstones throughout the pyramid's history. The first one, which Ra claims to have designed, was made of small, carefully contrived pieces of granite with crystalline properties. And you expect this to be like a magical antenna or something, but Ra says its primary function was architectural. It acted as a chimney.
An interdimensional intelligence comes to Earth and essentially installs a highly advanced HVAC system.
Literally.
Ra describes this granite capstone as having precise airflow ducts designed to freshen the entire internal atmosphere of the pyramid without creating any drafts. It was purely functional, designed to maintain an optimal physical environment inside the structure.
But then Ra mentions the second capstone. This is the one we usually think of when we hear the grand myths about the pyramids shining in the sun.
Right, the gold one. Much later, after Ra's people had departed from our density, humans swapped out that functional granite chimney for a more precious capstone made partly of gold.
And it ruined the airflow, didn't it?
Well, Ra notes that this swap didn't enhance the energetic properties of the pyramid at all. It was just a distortion created by a few individuals who wanted to mandate the pyramid as a royal place.
So they gentrified the pyramid.
Basically, yeah. It took a piece of functional technology designed for all and turned it into an exclusive monument for the elite.
They took a perfectly good ventilation system and turned it into a VIP lounge for an ego trip. Here's where it gets really interesting, though.
Oh, the building process.
Yes, because Dawn naturally pivots from what the pyramid was to how it was allegedly built. If Ra designed this massive granite chimney, how did they move the millions of heavy stones?
Yeah, the eternal question.
This is where the deep dive moves rapidly from ancient architecture into a wild, quantum-like philosophy of matter and consciousness.
This section really forces the reader to rethink the very nature of physical reality. Ra explains that all matter contains intelligent energy.
Okay.
The physical energy locked within a single rock is finite, but it is immense compared to what humans generally understand. Ra points out that the atoms in a stone possess an innate intelligence that exists within a grand hierarchy of the universe's consciousness.
A direct quote from the text is the intelligence of infinite rockness.
Yes, I love that phrase.
So, if I am understanding this correctly, it's less like using a crane to lift a heavy weight through physical exertion, and more like hacking the source code of a video game to change a rock's coordinates from point A to point B.
That analogy captures the mechanism perfectly. Ra says the process of moving massive blocks involves communicating with the innate intelligence of the rock.
You literally talk to the rock.
You entreat that spark of consciousness inside the stone. You connect the finite energy of that physical rock to the infinite power of the universe. The rock's energy field is displaced.
Wow.
It shifts from finity to infinity, which allows the rock to split, hover, and move according to the request. It's a displacement of reality, not a feat of engineering.
When Don Elkins hears this, he makes the immediate human connection. He brings up the old biblical idea of having enough faith to tell a mountain to move and the mountain moves.
Right.
But I found myself hitting a roadblock here thinking the exact same thing Don was probably wondering. If it's just about having enough faith to hack the universe's source code, why can't any of us do this today?
Yeah, why aren't we doing it?
Exactly. Why aren't we just rearranging our cities or our backyards with our minds?
Ra anticipates this and provides a very specific, almost scientific distinction to explain the limitation. First, Ra points out that the word faith is actually a stumbling block.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They say it's a vibratory distortion of sound that creates an artificial wall between religion and science. Ra prefers the term intelligent infinity because it appeals to people who seek with measure and pen.
Meaning people who require a logical, observable framework.
Exactly. They are bridging the gap between mysticism and physics.
If you are listening to this right now and rolling your eyes at the idea of talking a rock into moving, hold on for a second. Because the way Ra explains this actually mirrors modern theories of quantum entanglement, where the observer fundamentally alters the state of the observed particle.
It's just scaled up.
Right. Ra is just scaling that up to a macro level. But seriously, why are we locked out of doing it?
It comes down to the profound difference between individual power and mass power. Ray explains that for a single, isolated individual to move a mountain using the law of one, that person must be entirely purified of all flaws. They must have zero personal distortions.
Which means no ego, no selfishness, no lingering anxieties.
Right.
That is basically impossible for any normal human. I mean, we're walking bags of distortions.
Exactly the point. But, Ray explains, in the case of a social memory complex, a united mass mind, the physics change entirely.
Okay.
In a collective hive mind, each individual can still possess an acceptable amount of distortion. They can still be flawed, carrying their own minor egos and misunderstandings.
Oh, interesting.
But when their intentions are perfectly united toward a single goal, the mass mind harmonizes those flaws and can achieve the impossible. It is the ultimate cosmic argument for the power of collective action over rugged individualism.
And immediately after laying out the physics of moving massive blocks through collective intention, Ra drops a massive conceptual curveball about the Great Pyramid itself.
Oh yeah, this part is wild.
Ra states that the Great Pyramid wasn't actually built with moved stone at all.
Right.
While the subsequent pyramids built by other entities or humans involved moving physical stones from quarries, Ra claims the Great Pyramid was constructed using everlasting rock. This material wasn't quarried. It was created directly in place from thought forms by their social memory complex. They materialized it.
They literally thought it into existence. They spawned the blocks into reality.
But this creates a massive logical gap in the story, and to his credit, Don catches it right away.
He does.
If you have a united mass mind that can just think an entire pyramid into existence using everlasting rock,
Right.
wait, why on earth would you build it out of millions of individual blocks with visible seams?
It's a great point.
Why not just materialize one giant, perfectly smooth, seamless pyramid?
It's the most rational question to ask, and it introduces one of the most important philosophical concepts in the entire law of one material, the law of confusion.
Which Ra says is what we humans casually refer to as the law of free will.
Yes. Re explains that they didn't want the mystery of the pyramid to be easily penetrated by primitive humanity.
Okay.
Imagine if they had dropped a perfectly seamless, impossibly smooth, indestructible mountain of solid, everlasting rock in the middle of the desert. Humanity would have immediately recognized it as an indisputable miracle.
Right, there'd be no way to explain it away.
Exactly. It would have overwhelmed their natural development, and they would have worshipped Ra as infallible gods.
You know what this reminds me of? It's the Prime Directive in Star Trek.
Oh, that's a perfect comparison.
You can interact with an emerging civilization, you can maybe even leave them a subtle tool to help them along, but you absolutely cannot interfere with their natural progression. You cannot definitively reveal your godlike technology, because doing so fundamentally breaks their free will. It forces them to follow you instead of finding their own path.
That analogy perfectly illustrates Ra's dilemma. They had to meticulously design the Great Pyramid to appear as though it could have been constructed by human hands.
It was camouflage.
Yet it was intentionally disguised as a physical, block-by-block, imperfect construction to preserve the mystery and protect humanity's free will to either believe in a higher power or reject it. They hid a miraculous technology inside a mundane wrapper.
So we have a machine made of thought forms, disguised as human masonry, functioning as a giant granite chimney, and tuned by a collective hive mind. So what does this all mean? What was this massive disguised tool actually used for?
Reyes states it had a dual purpose. It was a healing machine and an initiation device.
Okay.
And those two functions are deeply intertwined. Ray explains that to use the pyramid's healing aspects properly, you need a purified channel.
A healer.
Right. The healer must be someone whose mind, body, and spirit are completely aligned so the infinite creator's love and light can flow through them into the patient.
But to act as a conduit for that kind of energy, you'd need to be a completely pure channel. How do you even achieve that level of purification? Humans are walking ego machines. Are we talking about, like, decades of silent meditation on a mountain?
You're thinking along the right lines, but the method described here is much more intense and mechanical. That's where the initiation aspect comes in. The pyramid itself facilitated this purification. The initiate would be placed deep down inside the structure in specific chambers designed for absolute sensory deprivation.
A giant stone sensory deprivation tank designed by aliens.
Basically.
Yeah.
The goal was to deprive the physical senses so completely that the body could, in a metaphorical sense, be dead.
Be dead? That sounds terrifying.
It does. But Ra explains that only when the physical body is completely silenced and metaphorically dead can another life begin. The extreme isolation forces the true, eternal identity of the mind to emerge.
Wow.
It allows the individual to understand and control their physical shell with total detachment. Only after achieving that absolute mastery over their own physical distortions were they ready to channel the energy required to heal others.
It's an incredible progression. You have to conquer yourself, silence your own physical form, before you can act as a conduit for the universe. It really brings the entire session full circle back to the very beginning, doesn't it?
It really does.
Think about the extreme care they took to balance Carla's physical body in the living room with the incense and the specific visual angles so she wouldn't be fatigued. Both processes, the ancient initiate in the pyramid and the modern channeler in the chair, are about mastering the physical body to access the infinite.
The symmetry between the ancient macro machine and the modern micro ritual is striking. And that concept of progression is beautifully summarized by Ra near the end of the text.
Oh, right, the evolutionary path.
Yeah, they outline the evolutionary path of consciousness itself. It starts with the basic understanding we are seeking now. From there, it moves to the laws of love. Those vibrating with love eventually seek the laws of light. Those seeking light move to the law of one. And those who vibrate fully with the law of one seek the law of foreverness.
And the most humbling part of that entire sequence is that Ra, this incredibly advanced six-density collective mind that builds pyramids with thought forms, admits they are still on this path themselves.
I know, that's wild.
They say they still seek to become all that there is, and they honestly don't know what happens beyond the dissolution of their unified self into the next density. They are still searching for answers.
It grounds the entire text. Even the cosmic teachers are still students of the universe, subject to their own limitations.
Yeah.
And you see that care, that groundedness in how the session physically concludes.
Right.
The closing rituals are handled with the exact same meticulous scientific care as the opening calibration.
Yeah, right before logging off, Ross scans Carla's body again. They suggest giving her extra neck support because they sense a physical distortion, a weakness there, and they give very specific, almost strange instructions about her drinking water.
Dawn asks if they should bring her a new glass of water to wake her up, and Rye insists she must drink from the specific chalice that was placed behind her head during the session.
The virgin material.
Exactly. Rueckert explains that the water acts as a virgin material. Throughout the session, the molecular structure of that specific water has been passively accepting and retaining the love vibration generated by the group's collective intention.
Wow.
Drinking it physically reintegrates that high frequency back into her fatigued body.
It's so fascinating how the mundane elements of our world, a glass of water, an incense stick, a block of granite, are just totally intertwined with the cosmic in this framework.
Yeah.
Which brings me directly back to you, the listener.
Yeah, how does this apply today?
Exactly. You might be commuting right now, or folding laundry, or sitting at a desk. You probably aren't building pyramids with your thoughts, or tuning your living room to 20 degrees north by northeast. But the underlying philosophy here is incredibly applicable to how we navigate our modern world.
When you look past the sci-fi elements of everlasting rock and sixth-density hive lines, the core message is deeply resonant for anyone trying to find clarity.
Ra's emphasis on unity, the profound power of collective intention over individual ego, and the constant necessity of finding balance in your own daily distortions. These are powerful mental models for dealing with modern information overload.
They really are.
We're all essentially trying to align our own internal satellite dishes just to get through the day. We're all trying to tune out the static of selfishness to find a clear signal through the noise.
This raises an important question, though, doesn't it?
What's that?
If we take Ra's concept of the law of confusion to its logical conclusion, the implications for our reality are staggering. Ra claims they had to build the Great Pyramid out of individual blocks to disguise their advanced thought-form technology as simple, flawed human labor, specifically to protect our free will.
Right, to keep us from being overwhelmed by the undeniable proof of higher intelligence.
So if a highly advanced some extraterrestrial force did interact with humanity today, wouldn't they be bound by that exact same law?
Oh, wow.
Wouldn't they perfectly disguise their technology, their influence, or their presence as entirely mundane and man-made?
That's a heavy thought.
If true, it means the most miraculous, reality-bending things in our world might be hiding in plain sight. They could be deliberately designed to look completely ordinary, just to protect us from the shock of the truth until we are ready to see it.
It makes you look at the world a little differently, doesn't it? We started this deep dive talking about the expectation of the mystical, the crystal ball, the spooky seance, and how jarring it is when the supernatural turns out to be precise, scientific, and almost boringly mundane.
Yeah.
But maybe that's exactly the point. Maybe the reason the universe doesn't look like a flashy magic trick is because the best magic tricks are the ones where you don't even realize you're watching the show.